We are live. Hello, everyone. Hello, our community. Glad you managed to join our stream. Today we have a very special guest on the stream, historian, senior fellow at American University in Moscow, writer and geopolitical analyst Matthew Ehret. Welcome, Matthew. Glad you find time to join our stream, our program. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. And I've enjoyed your program, your broadcasts for some time. So I'm very happy to join you to chat about the world today.
Oh, thank you. Matthew, if we can begin, first of all, from Middle East, you have very unique approach to global events from a historical point of view, and it's always interesting. And today, for example, in Moscow, foreign ministers of several countries are visiting and discussing situation in the Middle East, this latest escalation. And also, BRICS emergency summit did take place exactly today about situation in Middle East, and comments were made that BRICS is ready to play a key role if sides will allow sides of confrontation to allow more BRICS countries to participate. What is your take on entire this situation in the Middle East? Where roots go as far as history can tell, and what is your take on further developments, further possible developments?
It's a very difficult situation simply because the old practice of geopolitical analysis that has generally been applicable for many decades throughout the Cold War doesn't really work in this current situation with the current dynamic after October 7th. There are, of course, people who are putting into motion actions which are destructive for the purpose of geopolitical benefits. Accessing, for example, the offshore oil fields off the Gaza has been a major topic many people have been paying attention to in recent weeks. That's an aspect. There's a lot of oil. I think it's 19 trillion cubic feet of oil are estimated, and natural gas are estimated to be mostly in the possession legally of the Gaza people. That's a factor. And are there people within Israel who want that? Sure, but it's not that. It's not simply that. There people who want to make money selling arms, as we had seen with the wars in the Middle East with Halliburton and other things, and other Lockheed Martin and other corrupt beings. Yeah, there are people who want to do that, and they see money in this, just like they see money in all wars. But it's not just that. There's this other thing which I think is coming at a very particularly important moment that a lot of people have underappreciated, that we are not living through just a gradual moment of decline, but rather a systemic breakdown, which we're sort of in a threshold is being passed, whereby the system, as a system, a transatlantic and even globalized system that was largely put into motion, I would say, in the early 70s, is breaking down. It's just like the South Sea bubble or the tulip bubble or the many bubbles economically that were created within the Netherlands or within England or within other parts of the world. The US is littered with these things, are weapons of mass destruction. For those on the inside who orchestrate the bubble, understand that the bubbles are designed to pop, and only fools who are in it for money and think myopically will play the game and become the instrument of their own destruction and their own nation's destruction. We saw this with the Great Depression. For those in the know, they were very, very clear around JP Morgan and the upper echelons in Wall Street, who sold early. They clearly knew that they were about to orchestrate the collapse of their bubble in 1929, sold their stocks, bought real assets. We saw massive wealth transfer from 1929 to 33. And we saw the same thing again with the tulip bubble earlier. And that was, I think we can learn a lot from the type of derivatives bubble, which is much, much larger, much, much more global in scope today than it was back then, but it's still a similar thing. And it was always designed to collapse. So I think when I look at the Middle East, on the one hand, we have being put into play a religious-like zealotry, which doesn't do things for money or weapons or oil. And this religious-like zealotry has been baked in and incubated for many, many decades, if not centuries, to be a bit of a Frankenstein monster that's now being released, which believes that it's their mandate to have control over everything from a big chunk of Egypt, which is perceived to be in the right of the greater Israelites, all the way up to the Euphrates and beyond a little bit even. And then up a big chunk of Turkey, forget about Jordan, forget about a big chunk of Saudi Arabia. And this was outlined in the clean break doctrine by the neoconservatives coming into power in 1996. So I think all of that, when you read the clean break doctrine that was given to Benjamin Netanyahu over the dead body of Yitzhak Rabin, who had to be murdered because what he and Arafat were doing would have worked as far as not creating justice, but it would have moved the dynamic of the Middle East into something that had a future by creating a recognition of Palestine as a state, by building economic infrastructure, which Yitzhak and Yasser were both focused on, was thinking, how do we start creating industrial activity amongst both people to begin a multi-generational healing process? Water, roads, things like that would have been built. The World Bank sabotaged it back in 1994 when the $200 million requested by Rabin were rejected by the World Bank, saying you're not allowed to use this money for anything except for, what we say you're allowed to spend it for, but not infrastructure. So that plus his death derailed it. And then the clean break doctrine called for military invasions of Iraq, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia were all on the hit list in 1996. And this is the grouping that called for a Pearl Harbor moment to reconsolidate their power in America and beyond for the new American century. And they're tied to a bunch of religious fanatics who believe it's almost their mandate to usher in an end time scenario so that the Messiah can come either for the first time or the second time. That makes it very difficult to apply the old school geopolitical analysis.
Yes, for sure.
The way we used to, right? So,
Matt, you just mentioned certain forces that are very influential in the Middle East, and now since the latest escalation between Israel and Palestine, many states, including UN, did began working on or promoting this narrative of two-state solutions. Although I'm not really optimistic that this will work at this moment, because it don't really seems like Netanyahu's government is willing even to discuss this topic. But what is your take on two-state solutions? Will it ever work? Or I'm afraid I want to ask follow-up question. How big of a risk, in your opinion, that Netanyahu's government will continue this escalation in the Gaza Strip, at least in the Gaza Strip for time being, and eventually force locals entirely out of Gaza to Egypt, to Sinai?
It's much more difficult, almost impossible. I won't say impossible, but much more difficult than it would have been if we were in 1994, 1995. When there was obviously a lot less bad blood. There were still rational actors inside of Israel who had political clout, whereas today the Likuds and the zealots that were, Yossi Beilin, the foreign minister of Israel, had warned, we created Israel to be a sanctuary for Jews, not to create a new Masada cult. And many people in the West didn't fully understand what he meant, but he knew what he meant. He knew that there was this thing growing and growing inside of Israel, which killed his friend after the Oslo Accords. And Netanyahu's father was an assistant for the private secretary for Vladimir Jabotinsky, a major proponent of this. Rabbi Kook also was coordinating closely. Abraham Isaac Kook, one of the worst, I think, dangerous Kabbalists assigned by the British to be in charge of the Ashkenaz the head Ashkenaz rabbi for British Mandate Jerusalem and Palestine till he died. And all of the yeshivas that have produced the illegal settlement fanatics were all under the influence of the ideology of Rabbi Kook, who had his whole view of the need to create a global conflagration at the end times of humanity to bring in the Messiah. So this is the type of operation that many very powerful figures, Ehud Barak and others, have been influenced by. Netanyahu, who is no exception. There's even worse than him, who are just frothing at the mouth. So it's much more difficult today. When I try to think vicarious, I try to put myself sometimes into the mindset of a statesman. I have no power. I'm just trying to make sense of things, like many of us here are. But I try to think, like, how would a Chinese statesman think about this problem, and how have they been thinking about it when they, or Russian statesmen of a high caliber? How are they thinking about this? And I do think that there is an intention to still bring about some form of sanity, and I think that when I hear China or Russian leaders speaking about a two-state solution, I think they're serious, but there's a lot of hoops that have to be a lot has to be done that are not easy. On the one hand, what's currently in play needs to be held at bay by something. I think the Americans need to play a role. Currently, the Americans have shown no capacity to play a role in forcing a sane dialogue and a ceasefire of any worth. They just haven't shown that. There's nothing there currently. Does that mean that's always going to be the case? No, but currently it's very demoralizing. The idea of expelling the Palestinians, I think that is part of the main program of this phase of clean break. Now, the difficulty for Egypt and of Saudi Arabia and others living in the area is that, number one, they don't want to be held accountable for the collapse of the transatlantic banking system. There's so many points of trigger. You see, I mean, that's the thing. There's so many points where by pressing on any element, it could induce the chain reaction, which will tear apart the Western economy and create vast devastation for even the East at this stage. And so people are criticizing Egypt for not shutting down the Suez Canal as a threat to the West to back up or force a peace solution, or Saudi Arabia for not turning off the taps of oil as a threat to say, no, force a peace solution. And it's like, well, they could do that, but they would then be held responsible for breaking down the entire banking system. And
it may bring even more devastation, even to region.
Yeah, exactly.
And worldwide.
Yeah. And then the other thing that is more sympathetic is, well, why isn't Egypt at least allowing in? Why are they forcing the blockade to stop victims and people who want to get out of the hellfire into some place where there's a bit of sanctuary? Part of that, as many leading factions within Egypt have made the point, is that we're being played. I think Egypt understands better than many other people how the Muslim Brotherhood is the deep state of Egypt. And they were created many decades ago in the 1920s as a British program, a British intelligence operation under Haj Amin, who worked very closely at cultivating this thing. There's a variety of operatives who were deployed to be a counter gang to the more violent Zionist groupings that were put into motion by Rabbi Kook and Jabotinsky, who themselves were very closely interfacing with British intelligence and the Nazis, just like Haj Amin was. So in all cases, there was this desire to create these extreme eye for an eye operations to create bloodbaths with many innocent victims not understanding what's going on, caught in between, which resulted in, I mean, Nasser had to kick out the Muslim Brotherhood, though they tried to kill him a few times. They killed Anwar Sadat. They played a big role in the Arab Spring, the regime change operation that lit a fire across the Arab world. And they're still there. I mean, it's still a very powerful thing. It still interfaces with Qatar. I mean, I think the heads of Hamas, the billionaires sitting in Qatar in luxury with are colluding. I think there's a lot of evidence that have shown me that some of these figures, like Ismail Haniyeh, he has $4 billion ahead of Hamas. Khaled Mashal, Musa Mohammed, Mads Haniyeh, these are billionaires who run Hamas. I think that many people involved in Hamas don't understand this. They're just they want to provide support. You know, it's the government of the people of Gaza, so they want to provide support. But at the same time, how do you create people who become jihadis? Well, you destroy their families. You force them through degrading situations, as we did with people in Guantanamo Bay for a long time. You degrade them, you destroy them, and you destroy their families, and then you create out of very mild-mannered people those who have nothing to live for but to destroy and have revenge on the evildoers who hurt them. So I think Israel's a little bit worried that at this point, if they allow millions or 1 million or 2 million Palestinians to come in, there will be a lot of paramilitary group operations that would be interfacing between Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, to launch attacks against Israel as an excuse that Israel wants, as Israel always has supported Hamas since the 80s when it was created. They've always wanted an excuse to say, oh, we're just defending ourselves when we go to war with Egypt to take control of the Suez Canal, which is another thing people say, oh, but do they want to build the Ben Gurion Canal from 1963? And I've been talking to a lot of people who have been looking at this like declassified study from the 60s, which was declassified in 1993. So it's not like a big secret. And they're like, look, this is what Israel wants. And it's like, well, there's been no discussion that I've found at all in 25 years about this Ben Gurion Canal. But what they do want, because why would they build this thing that requires 500 nuclear bombs to build a canal into the Mediterranean through the desert when they could just take the Suez Canal, which is what's on the greater Israel map anyway. That's what they want. That's what they think God wants them to have as the chosen people. So they just need an excuse. They need to have Egypt have launch an attack, even if it's not officially the Egyptian government. And ultimately, Saudi Arabia too. They want to have an excuse for the more radical Wahhabite factions of operatives in Saudi Arabia that have been used by Western intelligence for many decades to be the active driving force once more, as it once was before 2015. People like the Prince Bandar bin Sultan crowd, right, who are more than happy to kill off their own people in order to get some money and some power. They want them to be in power, and they would like to have those figures attack from Saudi Arabia into Israel as an excuse for Israel, with the help of the United States and others, to go in and take greater Israel from Saudi Arabia. So it's
Matt, you just touched this topic of possible further escalation sometime in the future in the region. And to continue on this topic, recent days, basically since the beginning of escalation between Israel and Palestine, we did see how escalation began on the northern border of Israel, between Israel and Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And if initially it was a kind of border crossing fire, nowadays they are shelling each other on miles and miles deep inside territories that they controlled. Do you see any risks that this constant escalation between Israel and Hezbollah? And today I did see reports that Israel stationed about 100,000 its troops on its northern borders, which is quite force.
Oh yeah.
So do you see risk that we will end up in the further escalation between Israel and Lebanon, between Hezbollah? And if that's the case, then somehow Iran will get involved. Well, and then we will definitely have a huge escalation in the region. That's going to be regional conflict for sure. What is your take on?
Yeah, that is my biggest fear, and it does play in directly to the plan. The clean break doctrine had Lebanon high up on the hit list, and I think the problem. I mean, Israel's already killed some Lebanese militants in Syria. They've already done some attacks there. They're preparing also the groundwork, obviously, to finish the job that the Arab Spring couldn't finish with Assad. And Syria falls mostly all into the greater Israel map. So they obviously would like to provoke an invasion into Syria, and they've been launching attacks nonstop at different times throughout the last few years, even just constantly just letting that intention be known. Obviously, Lebanon is a super strategic point. There's two key ports in Lebanon, which are extremely, extremely strategic to take control of. But again, purging that area of Arabs through conflagration, bombing them to the Stone Age, and letting this doing exactly what the Nazis were doing to the Jews is ironically what's happening now in inverse. The thing with Iran is they are a bit of a game changer, a major force, and I'm not seeing one voice coming out of Iran. You know, you have the head of the Quds, who has a little bit more of a reactionary type of belligerent language he's using, somewhat, hot-headed. I find in the language. I don't think it's too responsible, which isn't taking too much into consideration regarding what I've just said. But then you have the foreign minister of Iran. You have the Ayatollah. You have a variety of people who have a very different messaging publicly about what they want and what they intend, which is not so violent or not so reactionary. And even though their cause may seem to be just, Israel has done a lot of evil, is doing a lot of evil right now, or I shouldn't say Israel, but these fanatical Zionists. Despite that, this is part of a trap. And I think for those who have taken a historic perspective to see how this was done, the same sort of formula was done by the British to give promises of independence to the Arab states at the same time as they were giving promises of having a homeland to the Jews, while at the same time working to undermine and undo the Ottoman Empire by promoting sort of Arab Spring style uprisings all across the very weakened Ottoman Empire. It's a very similar thing, and everybody was backstabbed back then. And many of the people, I think it's such an important irony that I think people need to really focus on. The major drivers of establishing the state of Israel, like Lord Balfour or Lord Milner, or I mean, there's so many, Chamberlain, Lloyd George, they were rabid anti-Semites and pro-fascists, and those who lived long enough became very, very big patrons and supporters of the Nazis. So why did these anti-Semitic Nazis want so deeply to have a homeland for the Jews, to convince the Jews of the world to all just go and live in the desert in this highly strategic zone at the intersection of these big civilizations? And I think that's, when you look at a map geopolitically and think like a Halford Mackinder, that's what they're thinking, is whoever can keep that zone in destabilization can disrupt any potential emergence of intercivilizational cooperation, as we've seen with the Silk Road throughout the millennia, provide a basis of peace through cooperation and development. So I think that's one way how they're looking at it. The other way was, let's find an excuse to also use the Zionists as much as we can within the context of what became the Cold War, to undermine the sovereign nation state system. Because at the end of the day, what is this whole push for a one world government under a depopulation scheme, which is what we've been living through as an intention? That's part of the creation of this economic bubble of the Western economy that's always designed to collapse. The people promoting that bubble back in the 60s and 70s, who turned the US into a speculative basket case of unpayable debt slavery and no industrial production, they were also Malthusians who were ideologically, religiously committed to reducing the world population. Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, all of them believed that we should have computer models define what would be optimal population levels at carrying capacity according to the Club of Rome of Alexander King and others. They brought this into a governing program under things like Rand Corporation. We had even cyberneticists like the Rand Corporation, cyberneticists in America making policy, infiltrating the Soviet Union. That's what Khrushchev said in 1960. They rehabilitated cybernetics, and then while he did that, he said, well, now that cybernetics is okay to read, we're going to make this the driving force of all Soviet policymaking. It's insane. And I mean, there were patriots or people who didn't want to destroy the Soviet Union at the time who worked to pull them out of power, but the damage was done. A cult was created. And these cultists believe that computer models are how we have to scientifically manage society, using linear projections into the future that computer models generate that don't take any regard for morality, creativity, creative discoveries that are not already there in the program. because computers can only extrapolate linearly. They can't make a new discovery. Only humans do that. They don't believe in creativity, or they see creativity as a destabilizing threat. Because when you allow that and you make discoveries that make new technologies, your limits to growth expand, right? Qualitatively, and you can have more people, better quality of life. So these figures have been obsessively trying to create a condition whereby a crisis, a shock could be set in that would then result in people accepting things they would normally never accept. A new type of image of humanity could be crafted that would be more malleable and more conducive to feudalism or obedience without thinking. And today, the resistance to that, who have rejected it, are coming out of the BRICS plus nations. And I think everybody's looking at this thing in Israel as being challenging in different ways, because on the one hand, I don't think every oligarch necessarily in the West necessarily wants to unleash nuclear hellfire on the world. Russia and China and even Iran have demonstrated that they have hypersonic missiles. So as much as your computer models were telling you that you could carry out a first strike onto China or Russia or Iran, well, those computer models are wrong, because now even Iran has said we have a hypersonic missile that can go 20 times faster than the speed of sound, delivering a nuclear warhead. Russia, China, they've overthrown the game theory models. So they would be able to, they would suffer, but at the same time, they would be able to launch a counterstrike that would take out all the capitals of the West too. So I think the how to deal with this Frankenstein genie that's been released from Tel Aviv, which could set into motion a chain reaction. You have people who I think are blind or ignorant to these subtle dynamics in places like Iran, who or even in Lebanon, who are a bit more hot-headed and would fall into these traps being set, which is very dangerous. I don't know if that answers the question, but
yes, he definitely does. Topic is so wide that it's difficult to really explain that.
Yeah, it's like, do you go there? Do you go there? I don't know.
Yeah, it's too complex. There is too many connections. And for example, I wanted to ask you about confrontation in Ukraine, your take on Ukrainian conflict, and do you see a connection there also as a kind of struggle of ruling Western elites or class for domination? How much of this element has in these two escalations in Ukraine, in Middle East, and possible some other regions where we may see some escalations? How much it has to do with this struggle of Western ruling class to maintain dominance over the world, because they probably see that maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but days coming when global South with Russia or anyway will play much more significant role, and dominance of the Western, these ruling clans or elites, families, whatever they are, their dominance will fall apart sometime in the future. And maybe they want to maintain this dominance and are creating these crisis zones. Is it possibility that everything is connected in this regard?
Yeah, I tend to see things from a global chemistry, because that's the old thing. You want to think like your enemy, and I mean the oligarchs in the West who have been trying to gain global hegemony, they have a global perspective. The British Empire always had a global perspective. That's how that little island was able to maintain such a sophisticated network of control for many years. How would that little island do that? Well, they thought globally. What they were doing in India was connected to what they were doing in the United States with their banking operations in the U.S. Because the cotton that Britain was buying from the South, which they bought 80% of the supply of cotton from the South, were going into the textiles of London that were then fueling and producing the textiles that were then as finished products being sent into the crown jewel, which couldn't do it themselves because they were not allowed. All of their textile manufacturing was shut down by the British. And so they were only left with, stay poor, enslaved, and produce opium. And the opium was sent then to China. And China was then kept subdued, and a crime syndicate around the Green Gang and others, often tied to British Freemasonic front groups that always operate with headquarters in Hong Kong or Shanghai, were cultivated and incubated to be local controllers of like a Chinese Brahmin elite class of criminals, which they also were doing in India And a lot these things didn't fully disappear. These remnants of the 19th century, a lot of the residuals were cleaned up in many ways in China's case, for obvious reasons, but there's still elements of this. They were cleaned up much better than they were in India, at least. But there's still elements of this, and the British were able to do this for many generations. Very sophisticated, and it's very similar today, except there's a little bit more complexity, more people, more computing power that manages the banking system, but it's the same thing. So yeah, what you're saying about Ukraine is, on the one hand, I think the danger of there's two major transport corridors that you're very familiar with. I know that I think the oligarchy is desperate to destabilize, meaning the Belt and Road Initiative. As currently, I'm seeing three primary arteries going from China to, in varying degrees, south, middle, and north through Russia into Europe, but also maritime branch points, also branch points through Saudi Arabia. There's currently high-speed rail being built up 2,500 kilometers across the Saudi Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, into that will be finished in a couple of years. The way things are going, it's quite good. That's an extension of the Belt and Road Initiative there. You have nuclear power also being embraced by a lot of these Gulf oil states to provide very high-quality, reliable power for the long term. A lot of energy sovereignty would come out of becoming nuclear-powered nations. Many African nations also have signed deals with Rosatom.
Yes. Yes.
Very important. And rail across Africa has been encouraged by Russia and China and others. Even the UAE has played a very important role at providing a stabilization of economic development for Africa that could easily connect through Yemen. You know, there's a rail line which I know for a fact there's been an intention for a number of years, but this is high level intention to extend the Chinese-built rail from Djibouti through a bridge into Yemen that would connect to the broader rail development of Saudi Arabia and then onward into the southern Belt and Road. You also have the Russian-Indian north-south international transportation corridor that goes through Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia. So yeah, they want to light this stuff on fire. Ukraine plays a key gateway through the Belt and Road Initiative Northern Branch as a trade conduit with a lot of potential resources. Ukraine is so strategic on a geopolitical level. But of course, what am I doing here? I'm still reducing things to geopolitics. That's fine to do it, but I'm also recognizing the limitations of what I'm thinking about too, because at the same time, there's these Nazi genies that have their own cosmology and religious zealotry that have been also released from that bottle in Kiev. Just like there's these other Nazi genies that have been released in Tel Aviv. And also I think that there's something dangerous within certain corridors of power inside the Islamic world to that interface with this, that have their own end times cosmology around the Mahdi returning after a global conflagration and the creation of a caliphate globally. There's another weird thing that I don't fully understand well enough yet, but I'm working on it. But they've got these things are hovering over the surface, making the old school geopolitical, like I said, analysis is difficult to rest on that alone.
What do you think when we are talking about Ukraine, and as you mentioned, there are connections to be seen just everywhere, really, on a global scale. But what is your take when it comes to Ukraine itself? My personal opinion is that at this point, while we see somewhat preparation of the ground by the Western ruling elite, Western media, to at some point distance themselves from failures of Kyiv regime. Nowadays, today or yesterday, Lloyd Austin was in Ukraine. Today, German defense minister. About a week ago, head of CIA. So something has been in preparations. My understanding is that they are preparing Zelensky to, at the right point, leave office and go on with his life, to open the space for Zaluzhny, for example, or someone else who can be negotiable for Russia, because Zelensky definitely is not. And what is your take? How close we are to resolution in Ukrainian crisis, and what can be this resolution in Ukraine? Can we see? Can we say at this point, because it's difficult? I understand, because it's ongoing conflict. So.
No, I like your. I think your analysis is correct, and I mean the Wall Street Journal as well has been putting out messaging saying it's time for the West to stop thinking about Ukraine victory in the fight against Russia. There's definitely a desire to create a, as you pointed out, to move the zone of attention over to Israel. Ukraine doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem like there's a chance that they're going to be able to access the promised money that Biden offered, which is being blocked, and I think will continuously be blocked by the House of Representatives. That's not going to happen. Zelensky has tried desperately. You can see that fanatic twitch. There's a little bit more white stuff in the system to try to rebrand the Ukraine conflict around a fight against or around the mutual fight that Israel has against the Nazis in Palestine, who are obviously backed by Russia, blah, blah, blah. So he's trying to rebrand it to tie them as if they're two sides of the same fight, which they're not, and everyone knows that they're not. So I think you're right. I think the recognition now is to try to create I won't say off-ramp, but something that would allow him to leave while maintaining a little bit of the narrative that they've been baking up for 2+ years, many more than that, 2 years. Yeah, I tend to agree. They're trying to rewire their script a little bit, but again, I don't know if it's possible. There's so many unreconstructed, unrepentant Nazi ideologues of the Bandera fashion who wouldn't necessarily just acquiesce to any type of peace process. They would,
Yes.
you know, it's like one of these fanatical Jabotinskyite Israeli settlers just agreeing willfully to just recognize a two-state solution and retract your operations from 1 inch of occupied territory. They would die a million times over before letting that happen. So I don't know. I mean, they that's why I call it the Frankenstein genie has been unleashed. I don't know how viable it is to put this thing away without forcing some form of and I don't want to say violence, but you need to have when Putin said he's intended a denazification process to happen. He's serious. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but
my understanding is that after this conflict will end, most probably I will give it 99% that majority of Ukrainian territory will become under one way or another, directly or indirectly, under Russian control, and the western parts of Ukraine I see become under control of
Poland,
Western neighbors, NATO members, Poland, Hungary, Romania, possibly Slovakia. I did see some indicators to think so, but yet again, who knows? It's hard to tell. Really, I may be mistaken very much. Matt, to continue, to stay on Eurasian continent, I was whenever I'm analyzing situation and current relationship between Russia and the Western ruling class, especially European ruling elites, I find it hard to avoid this topic that Western governments, Western leaders did make crucial mistake, in my understanding, when they become extremely hawkish towards Russia for whatever reasons, because my understanding is that with Russia, European continent, continental Europe will remain relevant force in the world stage in the long run. But without Russia, in 20, 30, 40 years, I see Europe as just some loosely relevant province of Eurasian continent. Am I wrong in my understanding of situation? And do European leaders or elites understand in which direction they are pushing themselves, really, and entire region?
Ship of fools, eh? Ship of fools.
I find it hard, really, to find any logic behind any serious logic behind the actions. So, what is your take on?
Yeah, well, that's the problem, right? Is that we I think make a mistake sometimes in overly projecting common sense onto our analysis of situations, because there's this crazy factor. There's degrees of it's sort of, it's a weird thing, right? Because people hearing me speaking might think, well, am I not attributing a vast amount of genius and logic I'm speaking about transgenerational planning from a top-down network of Western oligarchs. Does that not require a level of sophistication, logic?
That they may lack.
Huh?
That they may lack.
Well, here's the thing, right? It's like there is a degree of sophistication and high quality logic that does exist. I think that conspiracies throughout history do require this type of mind power in it within the self-professed oligarchs, the elites, so-called. But at the same time, it's mixed with crazy. It's a mixture. It's not just one or the other. There's a denial of certain basic realities about humanity, about the universe, that are denied by any type of oligarchical feudalist, any type of feudalist, like the feudalist that hated Tsar Alexander II and wanted to restore serfdom. There were a lot of them, right? I mean, he made a lot of enemies. So did his son.
Yes.
And you have an absurd way. There was a certain amount of intelligence within this crowd that created things like the Okhrana, that worked with people like Sergei Zubitov and they were able to play people against each other. They were able to play the mob in different times to become instruments of their own destruction.
Yes.
So you have that thing. And they wanted to restore feudalism. They wanted to go back to that good old time when the slaves were the slaves and the masters were the masters and the lords were the lords and everybody knew their role. And we had the same thing in every part of the world. You have expressions of this dark age thinking, but they deny the fact that the whole identity that their system is wired to is wrong. It based upon a denial of the truth of the human soul, human dignity, the nature that each one of these oligarchs, if they were born with more love and more opportunity, they could have been, like Prince Philip or King Charles III. If they were given some real love, some good nurturing, they could have been a good integrated human being who did a lot of good with their lives. But they were unfortunately born into one of these bloodlines that has systems in place to groom them, to give them a special education in Cambridge, to give them a special series of experiences that break something fundamentally human. I don't fully know the details, but something happens that's very well designed for many centuries, if not longer, to get these effects so that the progeny of the leading families will perpetuate the system of corruption they were born into. And it's ideologically based. It's driven by a certain sense that we are divinely ordained to manage the world as the master families over the poor families who are inferior. And so the transhumanist philosophy has become something that's sort of like a modern, I'm talking about the religious beliefs of fanatics. You got the Zionists, the Nazi occultists have their cosmology. But then on the higher level, the transhumanism was itself I think it could be seen as a religion for the elite, because it's based upon this idea that there's this singularity in maybe 2045, 2050 that they just imagine exists, but they believe it exists and they want their belief to be reality, that at that moment somehow there will machinery that they've built up is going to become self-aware, and at that point we'll have a breaking point with the new controllers of human evolution being the master class who control the gears of the CRISPR babies, the test tube babies, the machines that are integrated with humans, all this crap. And they believe, like, so when you hear Yuval Harari or Ray Kurzweil or others speaking about these crazy things at the World Economic Forum, they're conveying in a diluted fashion a religious belief of their masters. So you've got this teleological crazy that hovers over a lot of this, and they do things that are devoid of appreciating what they're manipulating. They don't understand what the system is that they're manipulating, and they're playing it like a game, like a board game, And so you could bring a bunch of Banderan Nazis there, cultivate one ideology there, cultivate another ideology in another part of the world, and promote greater Albanian ideology, who believe in some grandeur of some great Albanian super state of the past that never really existed, or the Polish-Lithuanian ideology, like cultivate that. And it's always going to be guaranteed, or the greater Turkic, restore the Ottoman Empire and whatever. And it's going to always be guaranteed to create chaos that they believe, they have faith that they will always be able to manage. Except now we have hypersonic missiles and nuclear warheads, which break that formula that's worked for millennia. So, yeah, it's...
Matt, I cannot avoid this question.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, maybe not for many, but for some, in Argentina, we have a first libertarian president.
Yeah.
Very, I will say, I don't know, interesting person. More I learned about this individual. More questions I have. What happened into Argentina that eventually this Javier Milei did become a president? What is your take on it? And what US maybe or some other players have in this case? Or it's just pure internal story of Argentina? What happened in Argentina? Because when I was reading statements of this individual, some of them, okay, I can understand, but some of them are very cringe, really.
Yeah.
What is your take?
Man, it's sort of, as you could imagine, global chemistry. So yeah, I mean, I don't see any nation's affairs as being localized to that one nation. It's all tied to a global process. I think this character is a disaster. I mean, he's a policy trend maker on the World Economic Forum website, Maffei. I think the problem with a lot of the Latin American countries is the Nazi problem still. Like that was the source of the rat line of many unreconstructed Nazis after World War II, overseen by Dulles and the British intelligence. And Argentina got it bad. Klaus Barbie was a major they were advising a lot of these right-wing governments that were put into power by Kissinger, George Shultz throughout the 60s, 70s, and overseeing just the deconstruction of anything good and viable within these nations that never had access to becoming sovereign economic powers. So there's been this international subversion of them using Nazis that have controlled policymaking in South American governments, but also not just policy, cultural standards. In Chile, many people still think of Pinochet as a great hero that gave Chile dignity. Pinochet, really? This guy, again, interfaced with high-level Nazis, worked with Kissinger, destroyed thousands and thousands of people's lives by wiping out intellectuals, students who were inclined to resist. Similar things happened in Argentina. I mean, the current Pope, Bergoglio, whatever, he was a bishop there advising, working closely with these Nazis, throwing his fellow Jesuit priests under the bus, setting them up for being tortured and killed when he was working with the Argentinian government of the 70s there. It was, again, a very libertarian right-wing government. And it's like, but they were dictators. And it's like, yeah, it's the same thing. Because in order to privatize everything, shut down living standards, cut Social Security, cut all the government funding, it's going to hurt a lot of lives. Now, people will typically not democratically acquiesce to what Pinochet did, because that's what he did. He opened up to the free markets, right, in Chile, and he shut down government spending and all these social programs. And okay, he actually did the libertarian free market Austrian school thing, but he couldn't do it without a resistance because people's lives are going to be destroyed. So hence you need dictatorship. But to get that requires the support of an international U.S. military industrial complex to bolster you with internal crime syndicates within your country. So I think with Argentina, it's a shame. It's really sick that the BRICS Plus is going to lose Argentina as a member. Part of it, I think, was, and I don't know that I'm not an expert, but the corruption that was permitted under Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner made people, I think, disgusted with whether some of it was overblown or not. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm from what I'm reading, there was a lot she oversaw and supported a lot of corruption, including into her own pockets. Am I wrong? Is this possibly misinformation that's been put into the media? Maybe it is. but the Argentinian people we're not seeing the type of fight that was last seen with Nestor Kirchner, her husband, and there's a lack of living standards, very low living standards for an Ibero-American nation on average, as far as per capita wages, things like that. So I don't know. I mean, it does seem like a foreign directed manipulation, and a lot of like Western conservatives who don't like the Great Reset are falling for it because he's using the kind of seductive language that conservatives adore regarding, we're not going to be woke anymore. We're going to stand up for family values, all this stuff. And it's like refreshing when you look at the toxic Satanism in our school system and everything else. But then the Austrian school ideology itself comes out of what is the Austrian school that he wants to bring in? It came out of the Habsburg Empire, of these nobles like Karl Menger, who was like the retainer for the Habsburg Empire of the 1870s. His students were like Ludwig von Mises and von Hayek and all these Vons. I mean, they were all retainers working as the courtiers of the Habsburg Empire, as the geopolitical logicians on the economic warfare front, thinking how could they retool Adam Smith's liberalism to accommodate the type of realm that the Habsburgs wished to control, of a more Catholic-oriented society that would then still accept Adam Smith, but they had to rename it, libertarianism, and it's not that different. And it's ultimately based on the destruction of the nation state, that the nation state should not be allowed to play any role in defining the affairs of the economy, the banking, no regulation. So it's basically saying, okay, we don't like the Great Reset, we don't like world government or these corporations running us, but we're going to destroy our national power to do anything about it.
To continue on this topic, you just mentioned that Argentina most likely will not join BRICS. It's this new president-elect already made the statement that he will stay on a distance from China, from Brazil, from BRICS. So that's, I guess, done deal. And to be honest, I think BRICS gonna be better off without Argentina. Let's be honest. Argentina has so many problems, so many issues, that when I first heard that Argentina may join, I was thinking, why? Because, I mean, why? This is economical bloc, first of all. And Argentina does has too many problems. Although, of course, BRICS, China, Russia, India, South Africa, they could help, including with the reforms, institutional reforms that Argentina probably needs. But whatever the case, what do you think about confrontation between, let's say, collective West and the global South, BRICS and BRICS Plus at this point? Because from January 1st, BRICS will become much larger organization. So where we are heading with this confrontation, and what's going to be outcome? Because even World Bank, International Monetary Fund already are making statements that world is heading towards this two economical systems that's going to be created in the world that will be in somewhat confrontation with each other, and these block systems. Do you see this kind of danger, and what it will bring for us, for ordinary humans?
No, it's a big question. It's difficult because that is the direction we're going in. The difficulty is that currently the thinking in the West amongst the so-called elites is incompetent. Mediocrity has really become normalized over many generations. We don't know. We've lost a living memory of how do you even build things. We have money, but I mean, Bloomberg, that one of their reports recently that they produced was something stupid. It was like the logic was, people are saying, oh, China is outproducing America in building ships and rail systems and quantum computing, and they outproduce us on all these things. But they were saying, but America produces money. We produce the basis around which money is created, and that is the king of all economics. And it wasn't a satire. I mean, I thought that's the sort of thing that like would be a satirical thing to say, but they were serious. So we've forgotten how to build hydroelectric dams and nuclear power stations and the infrastructure that was mostly all built up in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And then we stopped. It all stopped in the West. And the people who did it are in their 90s or dead. So now we've got new generations of engineers trained on computer modeling, which doesn't take the laws of reality into consideration very much. And they don't know how to do things with their minds in the real world. And so on top of that, the money that we think we have control of, I mean, there's a de-dollarization happening. It's accelerating for obvious reasons. So that is taking the steam out of the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world, and oil's being traded without the US dollar, but in local currencies. So the entire basis of the structure of infinite debt creation and dependency around which the US dollar structure was built up is falling apart. So how do you fund something like the India, Europe, Middle East corridor, which people had been talking about? How do you fund that? That's going to be 10 years to build that. It looks fine if you could do it, and that's why Putin even said, go ahead, do it, build it. You might learn a thing or two about being sane if you try to think long term again. Good, try. But I don't think they don't have the stability of their economy to do such a thing. The system's going to financially collapse at any moment. So how do you contend against an opposing economic bloc represented by competency that we see with the BRICS plus nations, which now involve the strategic locations of Egypt, the Suez Canal, Ethiopia, that represents the Africa Union, and the inner port towards the Red Sea, as well as Saudi Arabia and UAE, huge powerhouses, and Iran, and then the conventional BRICS. So, I mean, how do you look at the quality of what's being built, how they're thinking, the long-term projects, the ability to generate productive credit the way Chinese banks have been able to do, that's serving as a role model for the rewiring of banks in all of the other Eurasian and African countries that will be in a crisis where the West is obviously collapsing. They're going to need another model. They're going to be going with, obviously, the Chinese banking model of national banks that work very well under the control. You could have private finance, you could have private entrepreneurship. That's okay. You're just not going to be making national policy as a private operative. You're going to still be obeying some higher law. That's okay. We used to do that in the West. It worked really well when JFK was alive and Franklin Roosevelt and Lincoln. That's how we built up our high standard of living. It wasn't by doing globalization that we became good. That we enjoy these great things that we have in the West. It's because we were doing something very different that looks ironically a lot more similar to what China and their allies are doing today. So I want, I'm living in the West. I'm living in Canada. I don't want the worst case scenario to arise, which is possible. That the overall inability for the West to undermine or contend with excellence when you have mediocrity normalized, it's not going to work. What's left for them? Kick over the chessboard. What's that mean? It means launch a broad war and try to cause more destruction to focus on Eurasia than what you will suffer from as well, and hope to pick up the pieces after that. Maybe with holograms projecting UFOs and stuff to control the freaked out masses who are surviving. But it's scary to get into the mind of an oligarch trying to navigate through this type of crisis that we're in, with nuclear technology existing as it does. It's a scary one for me to think about. So I don't know. I'm not going to give you a final answer, but I do hope that the West could rediscover. I mean, the only thing that's viable in the United States, the only thing that's viable is the groupings of Americans that were awoken around what Donald Trump brought to the scene. That was not supposed to be possible in 2016. It happened, and there's now something which has is tied to crazy. Like there's still an ignorance culturally around many of the better conservatives of America, but there's something morally viable there too that I think could feasibly that's the game changer in the U.S. If that fails, I don't see any hope for the U.S. beyond that. And if that fails, then all of these worst case scenarios become very much more likely.
Well, our stream is hour now. Do you have a time, or we should?
I have 5 minutes, unfortunately.
Okay, then I have to ask. I have to ask Matthew one personal question. If you ask me, let's say 10, 15 years ago, name your top 3 countries, I will undoubtedly say Canada number 1, undoubtedly. And I had my reasons. And I truly believe that Canada was by standards of living, security, and for many reasons. I had my arguments that Canada was among the top 3, 100%. Now, if you ask me very same question, I don't even know where I will put Canada. Am I mistaken? Because there is so many disturbing news that coming from Canada, especially during this COVID crisis. That I was truly, to be honest, shocked. I didn't expect from Canada to hear this kind of news, that some people are forced to do this and forced to do that, and some accounts have been blocked. And I was thinking, this is really Canada. So what's going on in Canada? Can you characterize current situation in Canada?
There's a movie that I watched when I was far too young, traumatized me. It was called The Children Under the Stairs, and it was a horror movie. I must have been like 8 years old. I don't know how the hell I ended up watching this movie, but I think that my family members, my aunts or something, were watching it in the living room, and they thought I was asleep. So I snuck out and I watched this movie, and it really affected me. And basically, it's the story, as far as I can remember, of a suburban family. Everybody loves this family, great projection, high successful people, but they have a little secret, and they've been abducting children and keeping them in the basement under the stairs and cannibalizing these kids. It was a terrible story. I mean, it's so bad. Unfortunately, I see that as an appropriate metaphor for Canada. Not to a literal extent, but I do see that there's something
quite unfortunate, really.
Yeah, there's some skeletons that have been in the Canadian closet, and part of the system. It's kind of like it's a Fabian society operation. Like, here's the thing: I wrote a series of books through to put my research together, 4 volumes on the untold history of Canada, and it goes from 1774 with the Quebec Act all the way to the technocratic Quiet Revolution and what was done by Pierre Trudeau, bringing in the Club of Rome and the Malthusian cybernetics overhaul in the 1970s that established a much more controlled deep state structure that was the entire Canadian government. A lot of this interfaced with Oxford Rhodes Scholars. The driving force of this was a network called the Fabian Society of Canada. They were called the League of Social Reconstruction. They were set up by 5 Rhodes Scholars, one of whom was a handler of a younger Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was trained under William Yandell Elliott at Harvard. His classmate was Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, just to give you a sense of the control of this hive. William Yandell Elliott was a Rhodes Scholar who controlled the Chatham House of Harvard. And he, that's how this, there's these control nodes that are run by usually sociopathic men that are integrated. They don't fully, I don't think they all fully understand what they're doing necessarily. They're given a sort of experience at Oxford or the London School of Economics. Not every student at Oxford or the London School gets this experience, but if you're a Rhodes Scholar or you've gotten, a scholarship from the Fabian Society, you will be, a lot of attention will be put on you to see your talents and to bring you into inner clubs. And then if you pass those tests, you will then be sent back to your home country with certain tasks that you'll be part of as part of your role within a machine. So there has been something, the problem with the Fabian Society is that it nominally is socialistic, But if you look at the writings of all of the founders and leaders of it, from Beatrice Webb and George Bernard Shaw, or Lord Balfour, who was a leading figure in it, or Mackinder, or Milner, or H.G. Wells, or Bertrand Russell, they're all they're misanthropic anti-humanists who want to create a scientific dictatorship to enforce a mass culling of the world population and the creation of new synthetic religions that they all write about in different ways, tied around some form of eugenics pseudoscience to justify the management of the global cattle humans. So you got this ideology, and that's how they see technology. So when they talk about technology solving problems, that's what they're talking about, is how to use video games and technology to lull us into complacency. The technology of mind drugs, psychedelics that were produced by MK Ultra. That's the technology that they like. And computers obviously are a good way to interface and control systems. They don't see technology. I love technology. I'm pro-technologist. I think that technology is the way that we interface with God. By discovering God's creation through discoveries, we can translate those new discoveries into new technologies that allows us to
move forward.
Move forward, leap outside of the limits to growth. The old constraints no longer apply with the new discovery. Great. But that's a sacred thing. So they like the technique, the formula, the behavior of the technicians, but they don't like the spirit of what made that science possible. So in Canada's case, we've been given these sacred stories about ourselves and about Canada as this polite, freedom-loving society. We never had to have a revolution. We just knew by being patient, the British Empire would give us freedoms eventually just by being patient, not like our hot-headed Southern cousins who didn't want to be patient like we did. So this stupid story is given to Canadians. Obviously, it's modified. If you're a Quebec French-speaking Canadian, you'll have a different variation of the same similar story versus an Ottawa or Maritime Canadian. But it's the same kind of filth, and it hides the fact that that we have a half socialist, half partial capitalist, partial socialist system, which people say, oh, how great. And it could be great. Look at China, right? They've got a different sort of merger as well between capitalist aspects and socialism with Chinese characteristics. You could say on the surface, it's similar to Canada. Very different system, because there's no moral principle or philosophical principle animating the Canadian machinery except the principle of oligarchism, control. Keep people decadent, complacent, happy, and not challenging the structures of the Privy Council office, the system of controls of the deep state, essentially. And so Canada's now, we're doubling down, and we saw what was done under the pandemic. We've seen now bank accounts being frozen, new precedents legally are being set up there. We've got Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, two Oxford, one Rhodes Scholar, but both Oxford zombies who have been set up to become green fascist managers, like under a much more hardcore. People think that what Justin Trudeau represents is bad. Wait. Till Mark Carney is brought into play with the crisis conditions, like he was done back in 2009. That's going to be a different situation. But still, you see the echoes of this coming at us. I mean, 4% of all deaths across Canada, I was surprised to find out, were all assisted suicide as part of this program of inducing the useless eaters to be less of a burden on the on the system by creating conditions whereby depressed people can soon commit suicide. People who are mature minors, babies born whose parents don't want. It's now you're born and you might have a deformity or something, but your parents don't want you. Now the baby can have medically assisted suicide, according to what's being discussed in the Canadian or the Quebec Chamber of Physicians. So it's very dark. The trajectory is inevitably towards Soylent Green. Like, that's the direction. It's Soylent Green, the movie from 1971 or 72 with Charlton Heston. That's the trajectory. That's what the oligarchy is. That's their wet dream fantasy, is to get us to accept that sort of cannibalistic, kill the old, kill the young, then eat them type of thing. That's the sort of thing. That's the sick joke, but it's not for fiction. They want that type of thing. Well, if you don't want to eat people, you can eat bugs. Pick one. You have freedom. Use your credit score to if you have a credit score left, because you didn't say the bad words in public. You could use those credits to buy the bugs or buy some human-made baby formula or something, but that's the sort of sick fantasy. So the only way out of that is, like I said, it's for the only hope that I see for Canadians is the type of dynamic being forced into the world by Russia, China's leadership, and the associated adults in the room who are wielding the power of the nation state effectively to create a more viable system that is capable of pulling humanity, maybe in some cases kicking and screaming, but pulling humanity out of this dark age immorality and into something that has a future. And it might happen with some turmoil in between, but I think Russia, China, India, the other countries, they just represent such powerful ancient civilizational forces animated by wisdom, by and large. There's obviously deep state operations within Russia, within various countries that would like to subvert them from within. But I think that they've done a very good job so far at keeping those traitors to varying degrees in a controlled situation, and have been bringing online things that are in harmony with natural law and God's law. So that gives me hope. But yeah, I mean, Canada's not looking good. It's just not a good situation for Canadians at the moment.
I'm sorry to hear that, really, because as I said, ask me 10, 15 years ago, I will say Canada number one. Anyway, Matt, thank you very much. Thank you very much for participating into our program. I'm very grateful for your attention, for your time. And I want to thank also members of our communities who joined the stream. Thank you very much, dear friends. I will end stream now. Have a great day and take care.
Bye.
Bye for now.